So there are exceptions. But here's another way of thinking of this. The strangeness of the way the course is taught. It's the equivalent of doing this, having a course on English civilization. And then you're going to make it a 32-week course because you're going to have a part 1 and a part 2. And of course, English civilization, if you take the moment that the Anglos and the Utes and the Saxons are invading Britain, we're talking about a 1,400-year-old civilization. The point where the Anglos take over is not 1,100 years ago. So I don't know, do you want to do the point where they invaded or the point where they conquered? Pick one, go with it. And then what you do is you cover the first part of English history all the way to 1776 in the first course. And then in the second course, you just, actually no, you wouldn't even cover it in the first, you would do English history in the first course, like the first maybe 2 weeks. And then the rest of the course, you just talk about the United States. You just do 30 weeks of US history. And at the end, if somebody goes, wait a minute, I thought this was a course on English civilization, you go, we are England. We are English civilization. Well, I mean, yeah, we're a piece of English civilization gone rogue, but what about England? No, that's done. They don't do that anymore. They're not English. We're English. Do you see how weird this is? How could Western civilization have been born in Egypt and Iraq and then suddenly vanished after being there for thousands of years that you don't even deign to have a conversation about? When Julius Caesar is massacring the Gauls, Egypt is already 4,000 years old. Right? Egypt had a civil war that went 170 years. The United States is what, 240? 230 something. Depending on, do you start it with Declaration of Independence or the moment the Constitution went into effect? I've never figured out which one I want. One of those two is right. Right? I mean, Egypt has a sneeze that lasted almost as long as the United States has been around. So that's another weirdness about the conversation that we're going to have tonight, is I need you to reframe the way you think about this. That this civilization that was birthed in the banks of the Tigris, the Euphrates, and the Nile can't possibly have stopped being there. But if you've been listening to the news lately, it gets really interesting because when Russia invaded Ukraine, all I hear now is Russia almost accepted Western culture. Russia almost accepted Western democracy. The West is supporting Ukraine. West. It's the old conversation from the Cold War, reborn again. So we got to go back a little bit here before the Cold War to understand some terminology. When the English were conquering the world, when the English were making the world England, they didn't finish, obviously. They didn't finish. They got 40% done and they ran out of steam. But 40% is amazing. Think about it, that tiny, itty-bitty, teeny-weeny little island where they boil their steak and fry their tomatoes, where it's always raining, somehow conquered 40% of the planet. I still can't wrap my mind around it. They only ruled it for 200 years, but still, I don't even know what to make of that. That's talent. There was talent there. I'm not denying the talent. Just incredible talent, because a lot of it wasn't violence, right? The English would plant a flag, and the Indians are looking at it going, what is that? It's a flag. What does it do? It means we conquered you. And the Indians are like, oh, crap. You mean if we had gotten to your tiny little island and planted the Indian flag, we would have conquered you? And the English were like, yep, that's how this works. We got you. So there was a little bit of psyching them out, right? That was also going on. So, when the English had done this, they decided that they needed to make this idea of the East. There needed to be this concept of the East, the other, the nefarious, the sneaky, the mysterious, the strange. And so they came up with this idea of making the East being basically Asia and then going from there. Now, the Romans had this a little bit, and the Greeks had this a little bit. So it wasn't that the English made it up completely from their own minds. For the Greeks, it was the Persians. For the Romans, it was still the Persians. And so the English kind of had, oh yeah, this worked really well for the Greeks and the Romans. We want to have this for ourselves. So what they did was they named the far end of Asia the Far East. They took the southern middle part of Asia and they called it the Middle East. And then they took the western end of Asia and they called it the Near East because it was near Europe. In other words, what we call the Middle East was the Near East. What we call South Asia was the Middle East. The Near East is what we call the Middle East today. What we call South Asia today was the Middle East. But then the Cold War started. And we Americans went, we can keep this East-West thing going, but now we need the Russians to be the East, because the East is evil and dangerous and exotic and strange. So we'll make the Russians the new Near East, and we'll do the Eastern Bloc states as the new Near East. But if that's the Near East, then the Middle East can't be the Near East anymore. So we renamed the Near East the Middle East, but then we needed a new name for the old Middle East, so we named it South Asia in our new naming scheme. The Eastern Bloc states and the Soviet Union, it never caught. Nobody started calling that the Near East. But they did call it the East and the Eastern Bloc. In other words, it partially worked. It worked well enough. It got what they wanted. And now, in effect, what they had done was they had successfully divorced East Germany East from Western civilization in the minds of people. But this isn't the first time that somebody has divorced Western civilization from the minds of people. We had already done it to Egypt and Iraq. Right? I just got through showing you that the West was founded in Egypt and Iraq, and yet somehow we believe it's not in the West. In fact, even Middle Easterners will say it's not in the West. It's part of everybody's understanding of the world now. And this is, of course, at the heart of Orientalism, because the goal is to make it seem that the East is irrational. It's inefficient. It's authoritarian. And the West is democratic and liberated. And everybody's happy. It's all about ice cream. We build it into everything. So I don't know if you've ever watched The Man in the High Tower. It's probably not worth watching. The first season is. The first season was really, really amazing. But then after that, it kind of falls apart a little bit. And you could tell they just didn't know where to go. But it's about what would have happened if Japan and Germany had won World War II. And so it's really weird watching Americans walking around in SS uniforms, goose stepping around. It's just like, oh God. So the first season, the whole time you keep thinking, oh, this is horrific. Well, not to ruin the story for you in case you haven't seen it, but at one point, there is a good Japanese, right? That's a fun trope. Good Japanese, bad Japanese, right? We do this all the time. Good Native American, bad Native American. That's how we it's Downton Abbey. Everybody upstairs is wonderful. Some of the people downstairs are wonderful, but some of the people downstairs are not wonderful. Because we all know there are good lower class people, but there's scum lower class people, but upper class people are all wonderful. Because the guy who wrote Downton Abbey, of course, is a member of the nobility, and so it's a giant propaganda piece. Just remember, also he villainizes gay people, which is interesting that Americans like this show so much. So